Good morning, all. The name is Deshan Udupihilla, and I'll be holding the tech talk today on the topic make your project satisfactory. Right? So, when you say satisfactory, you might be wondering satisfactory to whom exactly? For ourselves, for the client, or maybe is it the organization? Well, actually, to that question, the answer is all of the above. What do I mean by that? Okay, that is the conversation that we are about to have throughout these slides. So I will be moving on to the next slide to look at the contents of the slide set I have prepared for you guys today. So I'll be giving you an introduction to stakeholder management, then practices in stakeholder management, and considerations to make while managing stakeholders, then the process of stakeholder management, and finally the softwares that are used for stakeholder management. Starting on with the introduction to stakeholder management. Okay, so again, as I mentioned before, you, me, the client, and also the organization, all of these people, all of these entities are actually a part of a category called stakeholders. A stakeholder is a set of people, a group, or an organization that could impact or be impacted by the project that you're leading on. Okay, what is stakeholder management? Stakeholder management is actually analyzing the expectations and requirements of the stakeholders and effectively engaging everybody in the decisions and the executions of the project throughout the project lifetime. All right. So you might be wondering why we need stakeholder management. So that is actually a great thing to worry about, because stakeholder management would help us meet expectations in our project, develop effective project relationships, and in developing those effective project relationships, we would be able to expand the business that we are continuing. Next, I've listed down a few best practices pointed out for stakeholder management. I mean, all these points will be discussed much further in the slides that are about to come, but I felt the need to point these out first. So the first one is identifying all the potential stakeholders, all being the operative word in that point. So identifying all the stakeholders can actually help the project succeed even further by the analysis process and like engaging them all in the project. All right. So next we have making sure that the entire team is involved and engages with stakeholders. So this is really important, because when you are continuing the project, certain members might try to like back off from these engagement activities or meetings or things like that. So you need to make sure that the entire team is involved when you are engaging with the stakeholders. And next we have keeping up with the stakeholders continuously. So this could be like weekly meetings or weekly like email chain that is being circled around. So keeping up continuously or constantly, that really matters. And finally we have utilizing the value of effective stakeholder engagement. This is actually a bit complicated, which will be explained further in the slides that are about to come. Okay. Next, I've listed down a few considerations that probably should be made while dealing with stakeholders. So one of the main things that you need to consider is the diversity of stakeholders. So when we talk about diversity, it could be the background, authority, experience, or the capabilities. So when it comes to authority and the capabilities, this will be discussed further in the slides that are about to come. So background and experience, these are really important things when you are dealing with stakeholders, because you could be dealing with people from the same organization, from the same country, from the same client even, but they could be coming from different backgrounds or different experiences. So it's best to consider that these people are very different people, different from others and different from themselves. Okay. So next we have the relationship that we build with stakeholders. So these relationships should be handled with utmost delicacy, because the relationships that we have with stakeholders can define everything about the project that we are holding. All right. So next, in having relationships with the stakeholders, these require great interpersonal skills and sensitivity, of course, because stakeholders are still could be people just as you and me. So they require interpersonal skills. And next we have the technology of communication. again, when I say technology, this could be the technology itself, as mentioned here, or the methods of presentation, like what sort of techniques you use for presentation, or this could be the vocabulary use. So I was actually planning on mentioning an experience that I have had in a former project that I was a part of. There was an instance which one of our QAs couldn't proceed further with his testing process because he either didn't have an access level or he didn't have the a required tool to process further. So he was with a conversation with the client that we had, and he just simply had said, "I can't do this." All right. So the client's response was okay, and then the call ended, and then right after, the client had mailed everybody, the lead, the organization, the higher ups, everybody, saying that if this person can't do this, find me somebody who can. So client had taken that comment or the thing that he said completely out of context. So that can happen. So the vocabulary you use, that also depends on the diversity or the background of the stakeholder, but the vocabulary you use while working with the stakeholders is really, really important. Next, we have the process of stakeholder management. So this is where we go to in depth in stakeholder management. So we have four processes of stakeholder management. First one being identifying stakeholders, then planning stakeholder engagement. Thirdly, we have managing stakeholder engagement, and finally, controlling stakeholder engagement. To give you a better view of this, I've prepared this slide. So here you can see each of the processes of the stakeholder management with their respective project phase. So as you might already know, there are five phases in projects. They're usually the initiation phase, the planning phase, execution phase, monitoring and controlling phase, and the closing phase. Closing phase, of course, is not mentioned here because we're managing stakeholders. Anyway, identifying stakeholders usually start in the initiation phase of the project, and this identifying stakeholders, this process continues. All right. So as shown in this slide, it continues here to the very middle. It could even go about 75% of the project life cycle if that is needed. All right. So then comes planning stakeholder engagement. I mean, so the planning process doesn't start after the identifying process. It starts right after the identifying process starts. So once you identify enough stakeholders, you start planning the stakeholder engagements, because that is really important. So then after that, you have the execution phase. This is when the project starts, and then you start managing stakeholder engagement. We'll discuss further about that into the slides which are about to come. And then you have, of course, monitoring and controlling. So an important thing you need to consider here is that none of these processes wait until the previous process end. So these start almost consecutively. All right. So next, we have an in-depth analysis in identifying stakeholders. So as I mentioned just before in the previous slide, it says that this is to be started in the project initiation phase and to be continued throughout the project. So you need to identify and keep identifying the stakeholders of your project. And then we develop a certain document called the stakeholder register. And this stakeholder registers could be really useful to document the basic information of the stakeholder, such as identification information like name, role, or location of this particular stakeholder, or assessment information like this assessment information could be like the requirements and the expectations that a stakeholder has. You might be wondering, what are the why requirements and expectations? What's the difference between these requirements and expectations? Okay, so the difference between the requirements and expectations is that requirements are the things that the stakeholders would tell the team that they need, and expectations are the stuff that they don't plainly put out for the team to see. All right. So that's the assessment information. And then we have something called the stakeholder classification, and you can classify stakeholders by various criteria, sure, but what's like mostly important, the most basic classifications you can make are either those stakeholders are internal or external, and either those stakeholders support the project or they don't support the project. All right, so that is the stakeholder register, and a stakeholder analysis can be held, which can help determine uh, the stakeholders' interests and what needs to be focused on when dealing with the stakeholder management. All right, uh, and then of course, as I mentioned just earlier, stakeholder the stakeholders can be categorized by their engagement levels as well. So here I've mentioned about 5 categories depending on the engagement level. It could go from unaware, restraint, and to neutral, and then of course the positive side, supportive and leading. All right, so in the next slide we talk about something called interest power grid. So this is what I mentioned in the slide which I had listed down the considerations when it comes to authority and the capabilities. It's like yeah, the power and interest are pretty much that. And as you can see here, the level of engagement can be determined. The engagement that is required by each stakeholder can be determined by adding them into a graph like this. All right, so as you can see, the x-axis contains the interest of a particular stakeholder, and the y-axis, of course, portrays the power of this certain stakeholder. So if you have a stakeholder with high power to affect your project and high interest in your project, you should manage them very closely. All right, and then you have, of course, the opposite of that, somebody who has low power and low interest. It's best to like keep them informed, but not to like bother with them too much. All right, just monitor them. And then you have these 2 specific scenarios where you have someone with high power but low interest. So these people can affect your project very highly even though they don't have much interest. So it's best to keep them satisfied. All right, and then you have your last category, which is people of high interest but not that much power. So you can keep them informed because they are interested in your project, and it's best not to lose such an stakeholder who is actually interested in your project. All right, moving on. Next, I've listed down a few types of potential stakeholders that you might come across in your project. So I've listed down people like program director, project manager, sponsors, customers, other employees of the organization. Yes, other employees can affect your project. All right, and then the labor unions, the project team members, governance board. Governance board is maybe the equivalent of the GDC when it comes to our organization. And then next we have the suppliers, the governmental regulatory agencies, competitors, potential customers, and group representing the consumer. So there could be many other types of stakeholders, sure, and some of these could be had or removed as a stakeholder, of course. And you might be wondering why labor unions and governmental regulatory agencies are in this list. Okay, so these are because they can also like significantly affect the project by the rules that they might impose on the project, or yeah, stuff like that. So these are just a set of potential stakeholders that could be a part of your project. Moving on. Next we have planning stakeholder engagement. When it comes to planning stakeholder engagement, a stakeholder management plan could be like really important in engaging stakeholders and making great decisions throughout the project. So the success of the project could be depending on how you plan the stakeholder engagement. All right, so such a plan could either be informal or formal, of course, but it is usually preferred to be informal. It is usually preferred to like be something that you keep to yourselves or like very closely within the people with power in your team, because the sensitive information that it might carry. Right. So other than the information that was listed in a stakeholder register, a stakeholder management plan can involve the desired engagement levels from each stakeholder and interrelationships between the different stakeholders. So this could be, again, as I mentioned before, this could be the organization and the client. And of course, you as the team is a different entity to that. So there could be a different relationship between the organization and the client as well. So interrelationships between the stakeholders are quite important. Next, you have the communication requirements and the strategies for each stakeholder. So each stakeholder is, again, I keep coming back to this, but each stakeholder is their own entity and should be handled with like utmost delicacy, which is like unique to that each stakeholder. All right, moving on. Next, we have the managing phase of the stakeholder engagement. This is actually really important. So due to the various types of stakeholders that are involved in a project, the engagement should be specific to each stakeholder. I just mentioned this. All right. So we can use something called an expectations management matrix to clarify the expectations and the guidelines according to the time, scope, and the cost of the project. Of course, as I've showed an example here, you can use something like this, a table like this, to first off, in the first column, list out the measure that you are using, which are usually the time, scope, and the cost of the project, and then how much priority you you invest in this each measurement, and then of course the expectations related to this each measurements, and then the guidelines you and the team are following related to these measurements. All right, and then of course we can use something called an issue log to help clarify the issues which were faced within the project. So when I say an issue log, you might be thinking of a bug list or something like that, because we are in software development. But an issue log is actually something that would contain various all types of issues that are raised in the project. This could be like a scheduling conflict, or maybe this could be like a resource issue, or even this could be like a bug in a project, or an access issue, or something like that. So when it comes to like issues, it's best to log them by their time, their importance, by whom that issue is raised by. So an issue log can also be really important in managing stakeholder engagement. Next, we have controlling stakeholder engagement. So something I need to mention when it comes to controlling stakeholder engagement, I even wrote down this. So even though the stakeholders cannot be controlled, so stakeholders, as I mentioned before, are their own entities. All right, cannot be controlled. The level of engagement they provide can be controlled. So this is what we've been discussing so far. And then we can use data analysis, data representation tools, and meetings as a crucial part of the process. So when it comes to, I've highlighted meetings here before, because this might relate to a different field of study in project management called communication management. So this is really important. So in order to control the engagement of the stakeholder, you need to control the communication that you have with the stakeholders. All right. So through this controlling process, you and the team can of course expect to gain information on work performance and change requests, which are again very important, and these should be taken informally. And of course, project management plan updates. Right, that's about controlling stakeholder management. Next, I'm talking about here is softwares that are used for stakeholder management. So one thing I didn't do here is that I didn't list down each and every software that can be used in stakeholder management, but I'll give you guys a general idea. The productivity could be advanced by using softwares like word process, spreadsheets, and presentation softwares. These can be massively beneficial throughout the process. And then of course you're going to need, not going to have to use, but need communication softwares and collaboration platforms. So these communication softwares could be something like, I don't know, Skype, or Teams, or Google Meet, or something like that. And collaboration platforms we commonly use in our organization, Google Workspace, right? And then I've mentioned that social media also can be a great way to engage stakeholders with the project or the updates of the project as well, right? So yeah, that leads me to the end of the discussion. So I'll just quickly go through the points that I've covered throughout the discussion that we just had. So we discussed the importance and the key factors in stakeholder management, and then these factors contribute to project outcomes, stakeholder satisfaction, and overall project success. And then we identify the process of stakeholder management, and of course, the process provides the methods and tools to receive better stakeholder engagement. And lastly, we discussed various softwares and platforms that can be assisted in stakeholder management. And hopefully, this helps you to maintain a better stakeholder engagement in your projects as well. So, thank you very much for being here, dear people. And if you have any questions, I'm willing to take them on now.
Are there any specific software to manage it? Like using Jira for project management?
Yeah, that's actually a great question, Yasas. So yeah, Jira or DevOps can be used for project management itself, but when it comes to stakeholder management, there aren't really any specific tools that can be used, any softwares that can be used or platforms. What we can do is, as I discussed in that slide with the softwares, we could use like various platforms, various like collaborative softwares and communication softwares to effectively control stakeholder management. And this is the responsibility of the project manager. And all those various softwares need to be controlled and like maintained by us. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, Deshan, I have one more question as well. Can you explain how does the stakeholder management going to affect us as developers?
All right. Thank you, Randunu, for the question. And yeah, the question is that how stakeholder management would affect developers in a project, right? So when it comes to developers of course are a part of the team. They're their own entity, sure, but they are part of the team. And of course, as we discussed, stakeholder management can help the entire team, all the stakeholders clarify the issues that they have with the project, or with anything that goes on. So I believe that of course developers are a great big part of any project, and the developers can also really like benefit from engaging with the stakeholders to like clarify the issues, and of course to get a better understanding on what other stakeholders might expect from you. And it could be it is really crucial for developers, the QA people, everybody as well, to engage in stakeholder management activities. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you very much for coming in.